Um, so years ago, I wrote a song called "Minstrel and the Princess," and I had just written it, and I performed it that night at a club in L.A. called the Knitting Factory, a big music venue, and it was the first time I played in front of everybody. And this woman came up to me after the show. She was a writer, an author, and she said, "Hey." She's very sweet, and she said, "Hey, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I just wanted to tell you I really loved that one song you did." And of course, it was amongst many that I did in the set. And she said, without having heard it again, I only heard it one time, but I really paid attention to the story, and I think you should expand upon it and make it something bigger." So I kind of went home with that thought, and it kept sort of it sat with me for a few days, and I thought, how could I make that bigger? And not being, I mean, obviously I'm a writer and a wordsmith, and I love writing and I love storytelling through song. But I've never written. I had never at that point written anything other than like poetry, which I'd considered putting out a book of poetry. And um, beyond that, my first inclination was not to make it a novel. It was to make it even bigger. And so my idea was to turn it into a musical. I started examining sort of some of the characters that would be in that musical based on what the song was, and then also looking at sort of my catalog of music that I already had and some other. I I like whimsical writing, so I've got some songs that have, the content has to do with royalty and kings and queens and stuff like that. I think there's a romantic aspect to that
Mhm.
I've always loved. And so I had a few songs that I thought, oh, I could weave that into this story as well. And so I sat down and started thinking about it. And then I thought, well, I need to go to England. So the backstory of Ethan, who's the minstrel, was that he was the first songwriter. And I was um, overly intrigued by who was the first person who did what I do. I think that for any vocation or occupation or trade or whatever, there's always a fascination of like, if you're a blacksmith, like who was the first blacksmith? Who did this thing that I do? I mean, it's a huge part of my life. It's how I make money. It's my number one passion in the world, and I want to know who was the first person who did this. Notably, my research led me to the early 15th century, which is when they said that is when we know that the first songwriters started developing this talent and performing and writing their own music. Basically, poetry uh, attached to melody.
Yeah.
And so then I thought, okay, well, that's fascinating. That's a fascinating time period because in the early 1500s happened to be during the Hundred Years' War between England and France. Well, then got me to the other lead character, which is the princess.